A man with a terrified expression begs for his life, offering all his money to his assailant. And kneeling in a store, he pleads with a hooded figure holding a knife, desperate to be allowed to live. The cloaked man just smiles, telling his victim that it is far too late to beg for forgiveness now. Without another word, the attacker lunges forward and drives the blade deep into the store manager's stomach. The man's eyes turn white as he collapses, a dark wound marking the final moment of his life. In a dark room, a young man with white hair suddenly jolts awake, gasping and drenched in sweat. He looks at his clock, which reads 2:30 a.m. and wonders why he dreamed about a man being stabbed. The youth recalls witnessing an accident yesterday and now a murder, feeling like he needs some kind of purification. But he pushes the thought aside, deciding it is more important not to be late for something tomorrow. The next morning, the sun rises over a building with a large sign that reads, RR Market. The gruesome image of the man who was stabbed in his dream flashes through his mind. Outside the very same market, a crowd has gathered around a crime scene cordoned off by police tape. A bystander explains to another that the store manager was fatally stabbed there the previous night. Standing in the crowd, the white-haired youth is stunned, realizing his dream from last night actually happened. His eyes widen in disbelief as the horrible truth starts to sink in. He then sees a body covered by a sheet being wheeled out of the market by forensics personnel. Utterly overwhelmed, the young man collapses to his knees, struck by the fact his nightmare came true. A man nearby asks him what is wrong and if he is unable to stand on his own. The female police officer notices his behavior. Finding it suspicious, she orders him to be taken to the station. At the police station, he is handcuffed to a table, begging to be let go because he will be fired if he is late. The officer starts the interrogation, demanding to know his name and his connection to the victim. The young man introduces himself as Ru Tajima, stating he has no connection and just lives nearby, and she presses him, pointing out that he seemed very shaken when he saw the victim's body. Growing impatient, the officer slams her hand on the table, demanding to know his relation to the case. And so Rui throws his hands up in defense, insisting frantically that he had absolutely nothing to do with it. And so he then asks her seriously if she would believe him if he said he saw the murder happen in a dream. The officer is annoyed, reminding him this is a police station and warning him not to joke around. Rui insists he is telling the truth, looking exhausted as he recounts what happened last night. He explains that in the dream, he clearly saw that the killer had a distinctive scorpion tattoo. Sometime later, the female officer goes to report the interrogation results to her superior. She hands over a file, explaining that Rui claims to have witnessed the murder in a prophetic dream. Her superior, a man with a thick mustache, reads the report and scoffs, asking if it is a joke. He dismisses the story completely, stating he does not believe in visions and thinks Rui is just lying. And the superior orders her not to let the young man waste any more of their time, and she salutes in agreement. And so as the officer leaves the room, she admits to herself that the detail about the scorpion tattoo is bothering her. And so Roy is finally released late that night, complaining about being held for half a day and being late for work. He stands by a cracked wall, remembering that all these strange nightmares started after a traffic accident. He recalls walking home late from work the previous night and witnessing a person get hit by a truck. The memory of the bright headlights blinding him as the accident occurred flashes through his mind. In the flashback, the large green truck swerves violently and crashes straight into a wall. Rue remembers nearly dying himself before going home and having that terrible nightmare after the accident, and he stares at the damaged wall, wondering if that moment was the beginning of all these strange events. And so, the wrecked truck has already been cleared away from the scene of the crash. Now, all that remains is the cracked mark on the wall, leaving him to question the origin of his dream. Suddenly, a hand grabs his shoulder from behind, startling him out of his thoughts. He whips around in alarm, demanding to know who is there. The female officer smiles, introducing herself as Oyama and thanking him for the helpful evidence, and she reveals they found a man with a scorpion tattoo who was connected to the victim. Rui feels silly, admitting he thought she was a ghost. He asks if the man was really the killer, and Oyama confirms that he confessed to the crime. Rui's eyes narrow as he processes the confirmation that his dream was completely accurate. Oyama leans in closer, expressing her curiosity about his strange ability to see things in his dreams, and so he replies that if he knew how it worked, he would not be wandering around so confused about it. Rui points to the wall, explaining his theory that the accident and the dream must be connected somehow, and she inspects the wall but sees nothing unusual, prompting him to stress the word, somehow. Oyama praises him for the big accomplishment and tells him he can count on her for help in the future. He waves her off, saying he will not need it and has to leave, worried he is definitely getting fired now. Back at the office, his boss is shouting at the employees, demanding they work overtime with no days off. Rhys sighs at his desk, exhausted and complaining about the unpaid overtime he has to do. At that moment, his phone starts ringing on the desk beside his keyboard. He answers, and a woman named Mio on the other end says she has a curious case for him to look at. Rui argues on the phone, telling Mio he is not a cop and is too busy to help with her case. And suddenly, his boss slams a hand on the desk, yelling at him for slacking off right in front of him. The man furiously declares that if Rui is not willing to work, then he is fired right then and there. A short while later, Rui walks out of the building carrying a box of his things, wondering why this happened. As he walks, he hears a strange chant nearby and turns his attention towards the sound. He sees a strange figure in a dark robe and a scary mask ringing a bell in front of a small crowd. The robed man tells the onlookers that a curse has been lifted, and they can now go in peace. Rui watches, wondering if the man is just a phony psychic or if he actually possesses a real ability. He decides to find out and approaches the figure, saying he has something he wants to ask. The robed man turns around and greets him by his full name, which leaves Rui completely stunned. The stranger then removes his mask, revealing that he is Abara Tenshin, Rui's former biology professor. Rui is confused, pointing out that his professor always claimed to not believe in unscientific things. The professor admits he has been through a lot, and his values have changed over time. He then asks what Rui wanted to know, prompting the young man to say he experienced something unreal. Rui looks his former teacher in the eyes and asks him if he believes in psychic powers. The professor smiles, explaining that science cannot explain everything in the world, so he does believe. And they sit on a bench while Rui explains how he saw a murder in a dream right before the crime happened. He holds his head in distress, worried that his own ability might have somehow caused the murder. The professor places a hand on his shoulder, telling him he is a good person and should believe in himself, and the kind words of encouragement seem to reach Rui, who looks up at his former teacher with gratitude. The professor tells Rui not to be so hard on himself and to let him know if he has another strange dream. He then mentions that a girl has been watching them the entire time and asks if Rui knows her, and so Rui turns around from the bench to see who his former professor is talking about. Oyama, the officer from before, approaches them in casual clothes and asks if her timing is bad, and she smiles brightly as she hands him a small card with her contact information. The professor excuses himself, teasing Rui not to let a good one slip away as he leaves them alone. Blushing, Rui becomes flustered and tries to stammer out that it is not what he thinks. Oyama sits beside him and apologizes for getting him fired, but he reassures her it is fine. She insists that it is not fine at all and firmly declares that she will take full responsibility. So before he can react, she grabs his hand and announces they are going to a murder scene, confusing him. She pulls him along as he protests, shouting that he does not want to go with her. They arrive at an old, abandoned villa under a red moon, a place rumored to be haunted. She explains that while it seems impossible, there are rumors that a ghost was responsible for the death. Oyama turns to him with a serious look, revealing that she wants him to help her lure the ghost out. Inside, she briefs him on the case, stating the victim was a 24-year-old woman who apparently strangled herself. A chalk outline on the marble floor marks the spot where the body was discovered by the police. As they stand in the dimly lit room, she asks if his ability allows him to see the culprit, and so Rui looks around nervously but admits he cannot see the killer or even the soul of the dead woman. She urges him to look more carefully, pointing to the corners in the ceiling, but he still sees nothing. Oyama considers his words, wondering if the spirits are not there because he cannot see them. He complains about her half-baked plan and tells her to stop treating him like a simple ghost detector, and so she calmly reminds him that he was the one who claimed to possess an ability to see things other people cannot. The youth corrects her, clarifying that he only ever saw a murder scene specifically within a dream. Hearing this, Oyama suddenly gets an idea and grabs his arm, enthusiastically suggesting they go to sleep, and so completely flustered and blushing, he stammers and asks her what she could possibly be talking about. She explains her simple logic, pointing out that he cannot have a dream if he does not go to sleep first, and so, as they walk, she asks where they should sleep, even suggesting they could stay right there at the villa. Later, they arrive at her apartment, and he holds a blanket while deciding to just sleep on the couch. But she refuses his offer, insisting he needs to have a proper dream because the entire case now depends on it. He seems wary, asking if she has any other options besides trusting an ordinary civilian like him for the case. She admits there are other ways, but explains his dreams are like a last resort, the key to a difficult puzzle. To reassure him, she mentions her colleagues are also investigating, so he is not their only hope. He finally agrees. As she prepares the couch, he hopes that his scary dream will at least be clear enough to be helpful. The clock on the nightstand shows it is just after midnight as the bedside lamp is finally turned off. After Rui is fast asleep on the couch, falling into the dream that Oyama had hoped for, he finds himself in another vision, witnessing a woman in a pink dress slap a man across the face. The woman is now on the floor crying, asking the man why he is using her as a replacement for someone else. The man coldly asks if she should not be happy, since looking like Tsukino is the only reason he keeps her around. She screams in anguish, a dark forked tongue emerging from her mouth as she calls it the worst kind of misery. The man's expression darkens as he asks if she called him there just to try and force him into marriage. In the dream, the woman cries, asking if it is so wrong for her to want to be with him, and she continues, tearfully reminding him that they were in a relationship that neither of them could deny. She then threatens to end her own life if he does not marry her, but he coldly dares her to try. The man loses his temper, shouting that he has had enough and warning her not to harm Tsukino's face. With a furious expression, he lunges forward to attack the crying woman on the floor. He shoves her to the ground with great force, causing her to cry out in pain and surprise. He then grabs her, yelling that he is not marrying her because Tsukino is the only one for him. Leaning over her with a menacing look, he says he will make her face reality before he lets her go. Rui is suddenly pulled from the nightmare as a worried voice calls his name, telling him to wake up. He jolts upright in bed, looking at Oyama with a confused expression as he asks her what is wrong, and so she explains that he was talking and sweating in his sleep, and she grew worried when he would not wake up. He tries to brush it off with a smile, reassuring her that he is fine and it was just a dream. Then, his expression turns serious as he reveals that he just witnessed the entire murder scene. Oyama's eyes widen with interest, and she immediately asks him to describe what the dream was like. He tells her that the killer was someone else, proving that the woman did not take her own life, and sitting together on the bed, he begins to recount all the details of the disturbing vision. After listening, she summarizes that the victim was pinned down by something heavy and suffocated, but she points out a problem, asking how they can find the man if Rui never saw his face. Rui says with a sigh that the killer's face never appeared, so there is nothing he can do about it. Oyama decides it is fine, concluding that a love-related motive is a huge step forward for the case. Oyama starts to leave, and Rui points out that it is only 3 in the morning, and she tells him time will not wait and asks if he has ever seen the sun at 3 in the morning. He folds his phone, confused, and reminds her that there is no sun at that hour. The following day, sunlight shines on the tall city buildings, signaling a new morning. Rui sits on a bench outside, wondering to himself if the investigation is going well without him. Just then, Oyama appears in her police uniform, and he asks what she is doing there. He says he was just wondering how things were going, and she happily tells him she found the boyfriend's identity, and she proudly holds up a garbage bag, explaining that she scored some of his trash which is full of his DNA. Back in his apartment, Rui hopes they catch the killer soon, feeling exhausted from the recent events. So he sits on his bed and remembers he got fired, wondering if he will at least get his final paycheck. He checks his bank account, seeing a low balance and realizing he needs to start job hunting tomorrow. Meanwhile, at the police station, Oyama is being scolded for trying to get Rui compensated. She argues that he was a huge help, and since he lost his job because of it, they should pay him a fee. Her superior tells her to calm down, stating it is not a decision he can make on his own. He dismisses her request, reminding her it is a citizen's duty to cooperate with investigations. The police chief sips his drink and asks if she has anything else to say before getting back to work. Oyama shouts out to get his attention, not ready to give up on her request just yet. She explains that Rui has a psychic ability that allows him to see murder cases through his dreams. The chief looks at her with concern, asking if she is feeling okay and suggesting she go home and rest. She insists she is serious, arguing that the last case was solved so quickly all thanks to him. The police chief massages his temples, thinking that maybe one day off is not enough for his subordinate. Oyama presses on, reminding him that they found the spec's DNA thanks to Rui's tip just yesterday. She passionately argues that bringing him in would not only solve cases faster but also prevent repeat offenses. Her superior grows angry, asking what she thinks the department is since she first wanted to pay him and now wants to hire him, and he finally dismisses her, stating he does not want to talk anymore and tells her to get out of his office. And just as she is about to leave, there is a knock at the door, and the chief tells the person to come in. A forensic scientist named Anatsu Mizuki enters, apologizing for having overheard their conversation. He agrees with the officer, noting how unusual the speed of the last case was and how Rui's ability would be a huge benefit. The chief looks at the newcomer with a skeptical expression and asks who he is. Mizuki suggests they simply wait for the DNA results, and the chief agrees to consider her request if it is a match. Oyama thanks him excitedly, but he warns her not to be premature as she promises to return with the results. And as they walk down the hall, she asks the scientist if he actually believes what she told the chief. So Mizuki admits it sounds strange, but he says that he does not believe she would lie about something like this. She promises not to betray his trust, and he smiles, replying that he already knows she will not. He then tells her to get some rest while he returns to the lab to finish the DNA analysis. Oyama waits on a couch, hoping for a match so Rui can get a job and she can make things right. An hour later, Mizuki emerges from the lab with a file in his hand, looking relieved to be finished. She wakes up from her nap and asks him how the analysis went, and he smiles at her with the results. He joyfully announces it is a perfect match and suggests they go tell the chief the good news. Back in the chief's office, The superior reads the report in complete disbelief, asking if the DNA really matched. Oyama smiles at her chief, reminding him of his promise now that the DNA results are in. The superior sighs and tells her and Mizuki to have a seat and report anything they have not told him yet. She begins by explaining that after identifying the victim, they looked into her history but found no suspects. She continues, stating the victim had no computer and her phone records showed nothing unusual at all. And Mizuki adds that the brutality of the crime suggests a particular fetish and a high risk of reoffending. Oyama explains that this is why they asked Ru to help, and thanks to his dream, they found the killer's DNA. The chief listens intently and then gives the order to move forward with the arrest immediately. The officer salutes enthusiastically and then brings up the subject of hiring Rai as a consultant, and so agrees, saying that if the man they arrested is really the killer, they will hire him as a consultant. Oyama is overjoyed by his decision, blushing as she thanks him for finally agreeing to her request. Elsewhere, Ru walks down the street feeling dejected after failing yet another job interview. As he is walking, a man bumps into him from behind, causing his papers to scatter all over the ground. The man apologizes, admitting that he was spacing out and did not see where he was going. Rui sighs in frustration, thinking to himself that even with psychic powers, things do not work out easily, and suddenly, he hears Oyama calling his name and sees her running towards him with a smile on her face. He immediately turns and starts running away from her, not wanting to get involved in another case. She quickly catches up to him and grabs his arm, asking why he is trying to run away from her, and he tells her he does not want to get involved in any more murder cases, but she asks why he would waste his ability. He complains that his power is useless since it cannot even help him land a decent job. Hearing this, she realizes he is looking for work and looks at him with a thoughtful expression. Oyama smiles brightly, telling Rui she has come to talk about work and that the chief agreed to hire him. He looks at her in confusion as she explains that she told the chief about his ability, reassuring him. And so, still in disbelief, he asks if he is really going to be a police consultant as she hands him a document, and after reading the paper, he smiles with relief and thanks her for the opportunity she has given him. She insists on thanking him instead, saying the suspect would have escaped if not for his help. Oyama explains they just barely caught the killer before he could flee the country, and Rui is glad to hear it. She tells him they are interrogating the suspect now, but she wanted to deliver the good news to him right away. He then asks what a consultant actually does, admitting he does not know anything about police work, and she winks and tells him he does not need to, explaining that all they really need are his dreams. Later, Ru is sitting in a cave when his former professor arrives, apologizing for being late from Shibuya, and so the young man tells him it is fine, and the professor says he does not need to be so formal with him. The professor then correctly guesses that Rui has found a new job, which he mentioned on the phone. Rui is surprised and asks how he knew, and his former teacher replies that he can just tell by looking at him. The young man looks completely baffled, surrounded by question marks at the professor's deduction. The professor explains that Rui was acting strange when they last met, so he figured it was job-related. He continues, saying he assumed Rui was fired when he saw the box but now seems much happier. Rui confirms he took his advice and wanted to thank him, and the professor is glad to hear it. To celebrate, the professor tells him to order anything he likes, but Rui just asks for a simple K-flat. The professor asks if his new coworkers are nice, and Rui explains he has only met Oyama so far, and his former teacher looks surprised by this and asks with a smile if he has joined the police force. Then, the professor correctly guesses that Rui is feeling unsure of himself, and the young man admits he does not know what to do. He explains he was only hired for his psychic abilities and is worried he cannot do the job properly without investigative skills. As the waiter brings their drinks, Rui starts to feel a sense of doubt about his new position, but the professor reassures him, saying that he can simply learn as he goes along if he is worried. Rui agrees with a smile, and his former teacher tells him not to rush, as things will become clearer with time. The young man admits he is not very smart and probably would not have realized that without his advice. The professor just smiles, brushing off the compliment and saying it is fine, and so then reminds Rui that he can always count on him for advice, since he is his former teacher. Rui's eyes widen as he listens, touched by the man's offer to help him with his new job. The young man explains he is unsure how much he is allowed to tell him about the cases he works on. He decides to ask his colleague if it is okay to share information, promising to rely on him more if it is. And so, the warm sun shines through the leaves of a tree, marking the end of their meeting at the cafe. Later, the police station, Oyama apologizes for the other staff being out, promising to introduce him later. Rui asks what he should do now, and she reminds him that his main job is simply to dream. She notices his hesitation and asks him what is wrong, but he quickly says that it is nothing. She leads him to a desk they have set up for him, explaining that his attendance is not mandatory. He then asks where her desk is, and she smiles, telling him it is right next to his. His new desk is clean and empty, but hers is covered in a large, messy stack of papers. She apologizes for the mess, admitting she has not had time to tidy up lately because of how busy she has been, and so, she then tells him him she spoke to the chief about his request to bring in the professor to help them. Rui agrees to her suggestion, and she advises him to keep in regular contact with his former professor. The young man looks confused and asks her why he would need to do that. She explains the professor has a special technology that would be useful, but he will not lend it to anyone, and she adds that there are still technical issues with it, so it cannot leave the lab, though rumors say it is finished. Rui points out there is no guarantee he can borrow it either, but she says to just think of it as a bonus. He makes a strained face, feeling the pressure of this extra task she has just given him. She then announces it is lunchtime and offers to treat him, but he insists on paying to thank her for the job, and Aoyama tells him to thank Mizuki instead, explaining he was the one who put in a good word with the chief. Rui decides he wants to thank him in person and asks if she can introduce them, and she agrees to contact him. And the scene shifts to a bright cityscape as Rui waits to meet the forensic scientist for the first time. He sits in a cave, looking surprised as a man in a suit approaches his table. Rui smiles and correctly guesses the man's identity, confirming he is Mizuki before he can introduce himself, and so the scientist smiles and says he heard that Rui wanted to thank him for helping him get the job. Just as Rui is thanking him, Oyama arrives, apologizing for being late to their meeting, and suddenly, they hear terrified screams coming from outside the cafe, catching all of their attention. They look out the window and see a woman lying motionless on the pavement, a pool of blood around her. Oyama and Mizuki immediately run out of the cafe to investigate the scene of the incident. Rui clenches his fist, realizing this is his very first case as an official police consultant. Outside, the woman lies on the ground with white eyes, her lifeless body surrounded by dark splatters. Oyama holds up her badge to the gathering crowd, ordering everyone to stay back from the crime scene. A paramedic in a white protective suit carefully examines the body of the woman on the ground. Rui watches the scene unfold, noticing that Mizuki is still wearing his work badge with his suit. He scans the crowd of onlookers, wondering if the killer might be hiding among them. From the street, Rui sees Mizu talking to a police officer in Oyama, curious about the conversation. The paramedic continues his work, kneeling beside the victim's body behind a line of police tape. Oyama relays the information, telling the officer that the man in the hat is the killer. Her eyes narrow with focus as she locks on her target in the crowd of shocked bystanders, and so she moves quickly through the crowd, heading directly for the man in the black baseball cap. Without hesitation, she delivers a powerful kick to the suspect, knocking him off his feet. The man yells at her to let him go, trying to draw attention by shouting that a cop is attacking a civilian, and she pins him to the ground, accusing him of pretending to be an onlooker after killing someone. Rui watches in stunned silence, sweating as he wonders how they identified the culprit so quickly. Later, at the station, they watch the suspect through a one-way mirror, and she decides to let him stew. The man sits alone in the interrogation room, handcuffed to the table with his head down. Rui asks if it was okay to bring in without evidence, and Oyama explains other officers are looking for it now. She turns to Mizuki with a smile, telling him that Rui's amazing ability helped them once again. Rui is completely shocked, thinking back to how Oyama did not believe in psychic powers before. He asks Mizuki to tell him the truth, and the forensic scientist reassures him the cameras are off, and Mizuki explains that the man drugged the woman to sleep and then killed her to make it look like a suicide. As he finishes his explanation, the door to the interrogation room slowly begins to open. An officer enters the room, announcing to Oyama that they have found evidence against the suspect. She tells Rui she is starting the interrogation, so he can head home for the night now that his part is done. The moon hangs high in the night sky, illuminating the tall buildings of the bustling city below. Back in his apartment, Rui has another dream, this time about the woman from the cafe incident. In the vision, the woman tells the man she cannot give him any more money, worried she will be killed if she cannot pay her debts, and so she yells at him for squandering her money on other women, telling him to just go die for all she cares. And so the man's expression darkens as he asks if she is really not going to help him with his money problems. Deciding he has no choice, he pulls out a spray can and aims it directly at her face. The woman falls to the ground, disoriented and asking what he just did to her as she loses consciousness. And so looks down at her with a smirk, impressed by how quickly the sleeping agent worked on her. He then picks up her unconscious body and carries her out of the room, her limbs dangling lifelessly. With a sinister smile, he tells the sleeping woman that all of her money belongs to him now, and so, he then throws her from the top of the building, sending her plummeting to the ground far below. Rui's eyes snap open in his bed, sweating and terrified by the incredibly vivid and disturbing dream. He sits up in bed, realizing with a start that the dream was exactly what Mizuki had described. He looks at his hand, wondering what kind of power the forensic scientist could possibly have. The next morning, Rui heads to the police station, determined to get some answers from Mizuki. He knocks on the door to the lab, and a voice from inside tells him to come in. And so, Rui enters and tells Mizuki that there is something he would like to ask him about, and the scientist guesses correctly that he wants to know about his ability, and Rui says he does not have to answer. So Mizuki smiles and reveals his ability is to hear the voices of the dead, which is how he knew what happened. And so Rui finally understands, realizing that was why he was talking the victim's body at the crime scene. He asks why Mizuki is not in the investigation division, and the scientist explains the restrictions on his power. Rui thinks even with limits it is an incredible ability, but the scientist just tells him to have a seat. Mizuki explains he is more useful as a medical examiner since he can only find the body, not the culprit. Rui listens with a thoughtful expression, now understanding why his new colleague chose his current profession. He then asks Mizuki if he knows why they have these strange psychic powers, and the scientist says he does. Mizuki reveals they are Death's agents and their existence is because of a bug in Hell's system. Rui's eyes widen in complete shock, unable to process the incredible story he is being told. The scientist explains Hell is like a computer, and every time the system updates, bugs are created. He tells Rui that every time the system updates, 6 bugs are created, and they are 2 of them. Each bug possesses a death-related ability, and together they are known as Death's agents. Mizuki further explains that to become an agent, one must face a life or death crisis and awaken their power. Rui remembers the traffic accident, realizing that his power must have been what saved him from dying that night, and Mizuki agrees but points out that while the power saved him, it can also hurt him in other ways. The scientist then asks if he has noticed any improvements in his physical abilities lately. The young man agrees, saying his eyesight has gotten much better recently, and Mizuki says that is just the beginning. Rui asks what he means, and the scientist explains that their lifespans are considerably extended. He continues, revealing a death agent's lifespan starts at 100 years, but it can also be stolen. Rui looks horrified, asking if the other 4 bugs will come to kill him for his extended lifespan. Mizuki clarifies that their extended lifespans can also be stolen by those outside of Hell's administration. Rui asks what happens if he gets caught, and the scientist grimly explains he would be used as a supply of lifespan. The young man is stunned, stammering as he asks how Mizuki could possibly know so much about all of this. And Mizuki reveals that an emissary from Hell told him everything, explaining they have a protocol for dealing with bugs. He continues, saying the emissary finds just one of the 6 bugs, and that person becomes the observer. Rui immediately asks if Mizuki is the observer, and the scientist confirms it with a smug smile. He explains the observer's mission is to monitor the other agents and eliminate them if they use their powers for evil. Mizuki then downplays his role, saying it is just a name and he does not have any special powers because of it. Rui leans back in his chair, complaining that Hell should just fix the bug if they know about it. The scientist agrees but says there is no use complaining, because to Hell, they are no different than insects. He tells Rui to get stronger to avoid getting other people involved, and the young man agrees. Rui then asks what happens if an agent cannot be caught and starts going after ordinary people. Mizuki reassures him that would not happen, explain that going after an ordinary person is a suicidal act. He recounts the story of a kingdom called the Nation of Secrets, where a king wished for a long life. The king developed a puppet bug and forced his citizens to consume it, turning them into puppets. Immediately after the king started stealing their lifespans, he, his family, and everyone involved all died. Rui listens with wide eyes, sweat dripping down his face as he processes the grim story. He asks if Hell got involved, and Mizuki confirms the king committed a taboo that Hell could not forgive. He then asks for a cigarette, and Rui tells him to go ahead as he continues his explanation. Mizuki lights the cigarette, explaining that if a large number of humans die, Hell will naturally investigate. Mizuki takes a drag from his cigarette, stating that most death agents meet unnatural ends. Rui asks if it is because their lifespans are targeted, and the scientist confirms this is the case. And the young man's expression darkens as he asks if all their predecessors as agents died as well. Mizuki confirms this, saying the messenger from Hell told him they all died unnatural deaths. Rui asks what they should do, and the scientist tells him they must hide their identities until they are strong enough. The young man looks distressed, wondering why he had to end up in such a dangerous situation, and Mizuki reassures him, predicting his ability will only get stronger the more he uses it in his work. Rui is surprised to hear this, not realizing that his powers could actually grow stronger over time, and the scientist explains there will be limits, like the accuracy of his dreams dropping with time or distance. Rui feels a little better, thinking that if his power grows, the police should protect him even more, and Mizuki asks if there is anything else he wants to know, and Rui says no at first, but then remembers something. He asks how Oyama knows about the agents, recalling that she did not seem to know about powers before, and the scientist smiles and admits that he was the one who told her, explaining her intuition is very sharp. Outside in the parking lot, Mizuki finds Oyama waiting for him by her police car. She explains that something about the case has been bothering her, so she decided to wait for him. The officer points out that he is not the type to help others, so she asks why he protected Rui today. The scientist's eyes narrow for a moment, surprised by her direct and insightful question, and he smiles and explains he figured she wanted to recruit Rui, so he took the opportunity to help her. And she looks at him with suspicion, convinced that he is hiding something important from her. As the sun sets in the background, she stares at him, waiting for him to tell her the whole truth, and Mizuki insists he just wanted to be of help, but Oyama says her intuition is telling her there is more to it. She looks at him with disbelief, asking if that is really the only reason he helped them, and she then grabs his arm with a smile, asking him to tell her the truth since they are close friends. He blushes and sweats, still insisting that he is not hiding anything from her, even though he trusts her. She continues to press him, and he finally caves, reluctantly agreeing to tell her his secret. Back in the office, Rui teases Mizuki for turning into a softie in front of someone he likes, and so the young man tries to deny it with a laugh, but his flustered expression gives away his true feelings. Suddenly, Oyama bursts into the room, asking Rui why he has not been answering his phone. She shows him her phone, revealing she has called him 19 times with no answer. He apologizes with a nervous smile, explaining he had his phone on silent mode and did not hear her calls. As she leads him out of the room, Mizuki waves goodbye to them from his desk. They arrive at a wooded area with a river, the scene cordoned off with yellow police tape, and so Rui complains that he almost died on the way there because of her reckless driving. She apologizes, explaining she was in a rush to get him to the crime scene as quickly as possible. He looks terrified in the passenger seat as she speeds down the road, her face set with determination, and so she briefs him on the case, explaining that something feels off even though it was judged to be an accident. He asks if there were any signs of murder, but she admits it is just a feeling she has, and she lifts the police tape for him and tells him to brace himself for what he is about to see. Rui's eyes widen in horror as he takes in the gruesome scene that lies just beyond the tape. In the end, the victim found himself this way. Rui covers his mouth, trying not to be sick from the overwhelming and gruesome sight. He gags and Oyama calmly grabs his belt to keep him from falling over. She warns him not to contaminate the crime scene, handing him the front of his shirt to use as a makeshift bag. She then asks another officer for a status update on the investigation. He reports that they have investigated thoroughly but have not been able to find anything of note. The officer theorizes the man was trying to retrieve a tangled kite, which is the only explanation they have. Oyama then briefs Rui on the case, telling him the victim was a 31-year-old unmarried man. He looks up at a kite stuck in a tree, wondering why anyone would be flying one when it is almost autumn, and she tells him it is now his turn to investigate, but he says he needs to get some sleep first to have a dream. Suddenly, his eyes go wide as a vision flashes through his mind without him even trying. He sees a foot stepping into a pool of blood, the thin white string of a kite lying nearby. Oyama notices distress and asks him what is wrong, placing a hand on his shoulder in concern, and so he clutches his head, gritting his teeth in pain from the sudden and unexpected vision. In the vision, he hears a man complain about the spot, telling someone else to hurry up and get to work. He then sees two men in dark clothing dragging a body wrapped in a black sheet through the woods. One of the men apologizes for kicking the body, saying it is just an old habit he has. The other man tells him to hurry up, and he agrees to finish the job as they are out of time. Back in the present, Oyama asks if the vision was too intense, and he can only groan in response. She realizes she should have let him get used to his powers before bringing him to such a gruesome scene. As they walk away from the crime scene, she tells him they will talk about what he saw when they are alone. In the car, Oyama offers Rui a bottle of water, telling him he looks pale after what he just saw, and she asks him how much he saw in his vision, wanting to know if he was able to see the culprits. He explains he saw two men right before the victim was killed, and they seem to know each other, and she says the scene is too unnatural to be a simple accident, but they need evidence to prove it. Rui listens with a serious expression, knowing that the police cannot act on his visions alone. She then asks if he can now use his ability without sleeping, and he admits he does not know. He tells her Mizuki is there and she should ask her, but she does not seem to know who he means. Oyama explains that Mizuki was helping the forensics team pack up their equipment at the scene, and she then tells Rui to try and remember more of the vision before she heads out to check security footage. The crime scene is quiet now, the area still cordoned off with yellow and black police tape. Mizuki finds Rui nearby and says he heard he threw up, and the young man confirms it, and the scientist gives him a thumbs up and agrees to talk, leading him away from the other officers. They walk through the woods as Rui explains he saw the victim right before he was killed, and he asks if this means his ability has leveled up, wondering if he can now see things without dreaming. Mizuki explains that for a similar ability, it was a dream that grabbed him without even touching the corpse. Rui asks if this means he can see crime scenes in his dreams, but the scientist says it is the opposite. He clarifies that while abilities can be strengthened, new restrictions are also imposed at the same time. Mizuki explains the restrictions vary from person to person, and Rui will have to find his own, and the scientist tells him not to rely on his powers too much, and Rui understands what he is saying. He then asks if Mizuki has found any new leads in the case, hoping for a breakthrough. The man in the coat confirms it was not an accident and plans to see the rest in a dream. His companion tells him not to rush and to go home and rest. The next day, the white-haired young man meets a girl sitting on a bench, asking why she called him out so early in the morning. He offers her a bag, then apologizes for not being able to see anything in his dream the previous night. He notices her expression and asks what is wrong. She tells him not to apologize because it is something beyond his control. Then she reveals she argued with the chief, who rejected a joint investigation. While filing her report, Mio realized this was not the first headless body case in the area. Her companion is surprised to hear there were similar incidents. She explains that a headless body was found last week and another the week before. Mio seems frustrated that nobody noticed the pattern. He asks if both cases were in their jurisdiction and questions why he never received any reports about them before now. Mio explains that not all cases get reported during an ongoing investigation, especially if there are no witnesses or public outcry to pressure them. He looks serious and wonders why their chief is so against them conducting a joint investigation into these connected cases, and she tells him it is because they have no hard evidence. He argues that 3 headless bodies in 3 weeks cannot be a coincidence. Amayo looks troubled, reminding him that his strong suspicion, while logical, does not count as concrete proof for the chief, and she recalls that the previous case was officially ruled a suicide, something about the victim hanging themselves. Mayo continues, saying the detective was certain it was not a suicide but had no proof. In the other case, the victim's head was never even found. The clean cut on the victim's neck was too precise. She believes not even a professional assassin could do it so easily. She then suggests he needs to strengthen the power he trained with Mizuki. The young man looks down, looking stressed by the thought. He admits that he wants to but still cannot control it. Realizing she was being harsh, Mayo apologizes, admitting he is right, and she asks if he is not going to work. He says the chief gave him the day off, but he knows it is just a way to get rid of him for a while. Mayo then suggests they unwind for the day, saying she knows a great place. He smiles and agrees, leaving the plans up to her. Later, the two are seen at an arcade. He seems to be having a great time playing a game while she watches him intently. After getting some drinks from a vending machine, they head to an amusement park as the sun begins to set behind a large Ferris wheel. Mayo smiles, saying that time flies when you are having fun. Her companion agrees and offers to take her home. As they walk down a quiet street, she thanks him for the fun day. He starts to reply but suddenly grunts in pain. He clutches his head, exclaiming that a vision is happening. Mayo immediately becomes concerned and asks him what he sees. With a pained expression he describes the vision. Someone came out of a side street and was hit by a car. Once the vision subsides, he asks his companion if a fatal accident has ever happened in this exact spot before. She admits she does not know but thinks the traffic division would have records. She tells him to wait there while she goes to investigate. While waiting, he sits on a bench, massaging his temples. The intense headache makes him wish he had better control over his ability, and so the image from his vision flashes in his mind again, showing a person lying lifelessly on the pavement in front of a truck. And so he looks towards the alley and gets a bad feeling, muttering that something is very wrong about this situation. And suddenly, something cold is pressed against his cheek, startling him from his thoughts. Mayo has returned with a cold drink for him. She reports that there have been no fatal accidents in this area for the past 2 years. Confused, he wonders what the scene he saw could have been. He then speculates that it might be connected to the headless case. Upon hearing his theory, Mio's eyes widen in alarm as she seems to realize something important. And just then, a truck speeds down the alley toward her. A young man with headphones stands nearby, unaware of the danger as she falls. The young man remains oblivious, lost in his music, as the truck barrels towards the girl on the ground. At the last possible second, he finally notices the truck and lunges, pulling Mio out of the way just in time. And so watching the scene unfold, the white-haired hero realizes vision was not from the past but a premonition of the future. He immediately pulls out his phone to call for an ambulance. Meanwhile, Mayo checks on the young man who saved her but was hit by the truck. Mayo is also on the phone, asking her companion if he is okay. He runs toward them while urging the ambulance to hurry. She tells the injured man that his leg is broken and warns him not to move. She then gets up to check on the driver of the truck. Her companion says he will go check on the driver, while Mio confirms she will stay with the injured young man. A crowd begins to gather around the scene, prompting Mio to instruct the onlookers to step back for their own safety. Shortly after, the sound of sirens fills the air as police cars and an ambulance speed toward the alley, and so paramedics arrive and carefully place the injured hero on a stretcher before loading him into the back of the ambulance. A police officer tells Mio they will question the victim at the hospital. She reports that the forensics team is stuck in traffic. After things have settled down, Mio tells her partner they can talk tomorrow, suggesting he go home for the day. The next morning begins under a bright and clear sky, marking the start of a new day. Back at the office, Mio sits at her desk, overwhelmed by stacks of paperwork. Her partner arrives, and she asks if he could not sleep. He confirms he was restless and immediately asks for an update on the investigation into yesterday's accident. She explains that it was caused by poor vehicle maintenance and faulty brakes, reassuring him that it was just a traffic accident. Mayo then informs him that Mizuki called about the headless case, suggesting they go see him together, and he agrees. As they approach, a man in a lab coat holding a coffee mug turns to them and offers them a cup. The white-haired young man declines, asking where the files are, while Mayo accepts the offer and asks for sugar. Mizuki tells them the files are on the desk as he gets up to prepare his colleague's drink. While reading the report, Mio is shocked to learn the cause of death was mechanical asphyxiation. Mizuki confirms his findings. She reads that strangulation can take 1 to 2 minutes on a non-resisting victim, but that would be impossible without leaving traces. Mizuki adds that there were no signs of a struggle at the scene or on the body, which makes no sense. Her partner speculates that the lack of struggle would make sense if the victim was asphyxiated first and then decapitated. Mizuki agrees that it is not impossible. The youth accuses him of covering things up, but Mizuki says his reasoning is sound, though incomplete, and as he hands over the coffee, he asks the most important question: where is the evidence for this theory? Maya lists various ways asphyxiation could occur, including strangulation, drowning, or even carbon monoxide poisoning, and so her partner points out the body was found in a park and questions why someone would leave it in such a visible location. Mizuki asks Mayo if she checked on the information he requested. She confirms she did. Mizuki explains that while details were scarce, the corpse from the river showed signs of gigantism, just like the other 2 cases. He asks what she found, and so Mio concludes that if regular investigation methods are not working, they will have to rely on psychic abilities to solve the case. The young man reveals he has not had a dream since the first one. Mayo questions this, thinking his ability had leveled up. Mizuki interrupts, stating he spoke with Rui and has a hypothesis about the rapid growth of his powers. He explains that psychic abilities, while unscientific, can be strengthened through repeated use, like exercising a muscle. However, Rui's growth is too fast. Mio agrees, noting it has been less than a month since he got his ability. She has had hers for a year and has more experience. The youth asks if that makes them generational peers. Mizuki clarifies that all agents born in the same update cycle are considered the same generation, and frustrated with the tangent, Mio tells him to get to the point of his hypothesis. So Mizuki theorizes that other agents were likely involved in Rui's initial incident and awakened their powers because of it. This revelation shocks both Rui and Mayo, who realize the traffic accident was more than it seemed. Mayo says she found nothing unusual in the case file. Mizuki admits he thought so too until he found a specific note in the documents. It mentioned anomalies can occur when agents experience life or death events together, and so the image of the car crash flashes through their minds, a pivotal moment that changed everything for them. Mayo clarifies if the note means one or both agents nearly dying during the shared event. Mizuki confirms this is exactly what it means, suggesting Rui's accident likely fulfilled this condition for awakening his powers. Rui asks if this is a good thing. Mizuki replies that he does not know, but it has been beneficial for him so far. Mayo decides they should stop talking and review the materials from that accident again. As she leaves, Mizuki warns Rui that if his hypothesis is correct, then other agents have probably already found him. The young agent's eyes widen in shock as the implications of his colleague's words sink in, and he says it is impossible as it has not even been a month since he became a proxy. He insists he has barely interacted with anyone, so Mizuki tells him to calm down, but the youth questions if getting involved in their case is the same as being discovered by other agents, and so the man in the code explains that is what their enemies want him to think. He says it is all speculation and they will talk after reviewing the files. Mizuki then warns him that he is not a fan of overly dramatic scenes and tells him to keep this information from Mio. The white-haired agent realizes Mizuki waited for her to leave on purpose. He asks why he wants to keep it a secret from her, and Mizuki says he does not want to drag her in any further. Rui argues that she is already involved and should not have been told about the proxy. With a frustrated tone, Mizuki repeats that he does not want to involve Mayo any more than she already is. He looks down, muttering that love is not worth the trouble it brings, his expression turning grim. At that moment, Mayo returns carrying a large stack of files, asking what the two of them were talking about. Both men quickly put on a smile, trying to act casual as they tell her it was nothing special, and so Mayo places the documents on the desk, announcing she brought all the files that might be related and suggests they review them together. As they look through the papers, Rue comments that they seem like ordinary cases aside from the coincidences. Mayo agrees that nothing stands out. He asks what she means by that. She reads from a file that his accident was at 9:12 p.m. and caused by drunk driving, which seems normal. However, she then reveals a shocking connection. The powerful Satanaka group is involved, with one of the 4 victims being related to them by blood. The other 3 victims, she continues, were either employees of the group or had some other connection to them, and Mizuki is surprised and asks if she investigated the Satanaka group. He then presses her to share what she discovered. She explains that they are a massive conglomerate with influence in every industry, and their base of operations is in Imea City. Everyone knows the group is shady, but the higher-ups refuse to let them investigate, writing off every incident as a simple accident. Mizuki finally understands why they never received any intelligence. He then brings up a rape-murder case from 3 years ago, and the young agent's eyes widen in shock as he grasps the implications of his colleague's words. He says it's impossible as he hasn't even been a prosecutor for a month. He insists he's barely interacted with anyone, and Mizuki asks him to calm down, but the young man questions whether getting involved in their case is the same as being discovered by other agents. The man in the trench coat explains that this is what his enemies want him to think. He says it's all speculation and that they'll talk after reviewing the files. And Mizuki then warns him that she's not a fan of overly dramatic scenes and tells him to keep this information from Mio. The white-haired agent realizes that Mizuki deliberately waited for her to leave. He asks why he wants to keep this a secret from her, and so Mizuki says she doesn't want to drag her further into the case. Rui argues that she's already involved and shouldn't have been informed about the power of attorney. With a frustrated tone, Mizuki repeats that he doesn't want to involve Mayo any more than she already is. He looks down, muttering that love isn't worth the trouble it brings, his expression grim. At that moment, Mayo returns carrying a large stack of files, asking what they were talking about. The two men quickly crack a smile, trying to act casual as they tell her it was nothing special. And so, Mio places the documents on the table, announcing that she has brought all the files that might be related and suggests they review them together. As they examine the papers, Ru comments that they seem like ordinary cases, aside from the coincidences. Mayo agrees that nothing stands out. He asks what she means by that. She reads from a file that his accident occurred at 9:12 p.m. and was caused by drunk driving, which seems normal. However, she then reveals a shocking connection. The powerful Satanaka group is involved, with one of the 4 victims being a blood relative. And so the other 3 victims, she continues, were employees of the group or had some other connection to them. Mizuki is surprised and asks if she investigated the Satanaka group. He then presses her to share what she discovered. She explains that they are a large conglomerate with influence in every industry and their base of operations is in Imiya City. Everyone knows the group is suspicious, but the higher-ups refuse to let them investigate, dismissing all the incidents as simple accidents. Mizuki finally understands why they never received any information. He then brings up a murder case from 3 years ago, and she confirms the suspect was the 9th son of the Satanaka family. They were just one step away from putting him in prison for life. Mizuki recalls they had testimonies and evidence, but in court, witnesses changed their stories and the evidence was dismissed as fake. He tells Mayo they cannot beat the family's power. She clenches her fist, vowing to imprison every single one of them someday. And just then, Rui interrupts them while looking at a file. He points out that something in the report is very weird. Mayo asks what he means. He questions why the accident report only mentions him and the driver. She looks at him, confused, and asks if it is because they were the only 2 people present at the scene. He insists there was a 3rd person there, a stylish man who looked to be in his 20s. Seeing their blank stares, he tells them to check his own statement from back then to prove it. And so Mizuki picks up the file and begins to read through the young agent's statement, looking confused by what he sees. Mayo states that she was the one who questioned him. She clearly remembers him saying there were only 2 people at the scene. He is certain there was a 3rd person, but she suggests he might be mistaken. He firmly denies it. A sudden flash of insight crosses his eyes as a fragmented memory resurfaces. He sees a blurry silhouette of a 3rd figure at the accident scene. Mio calls his name, worried. As he clutches his head in pain, Mizuki suggests that his memory must be confused. The white-haired agent asks what he means. The man in the coat explains it is not just a normal case of confusion, and he then reveals that the young man's memories have been altered by an external cause. Both Rui and Mayo are completely stunned by this shocking revelation, unable to believe what they just heard. Mizuki asks them why they look so surprised and if they think he is joking. Rui calls it sci-fi nonsense, and so Mayo then reveals that even proxies have had their memories tampered with before, adding that they are not as impressive as he thinks. Mizuki agrees, explaining that proxies can be killed by a single bullet like any human. Their only special trait is longevity. Mayo adds that while proxies are vulnerable, it is still rare for them to be defeated by ordinary people. Rui tries to get them back on track, asking if his tampered memories mean other proxies have found him. Mizuki confirms this is likely the case but clarifies it was not manipulation but a revision. Mayo tells him not to worry. Mizuki reassures him that since they did not kill him, he is not a special target. Rui then asks if the memory revision is temporary. The man in the coat explains that Hell's memory revision is a permanent event, and Rui's case was likely a coincidence. Memory revision, he continues, only happens at the moment of awakening, a critical transition between life and death. When Mayo asks for a simpler explanation, Mizuki looks flustered, unsure how to make the complex concept easier to understand, and he tells her to think of it like a video game glitch. At the moment of death, a person becomes a proxy and may enter a realm between life and death. In that realm, no one can interfere. So, even if memories are revised, Hell turns a blind eye because they cannot intervene. Mayo wonders why someone would revise Rui's memories if there was no real benefit to it. The young agent suggests that if it is connected to the Satanaka group, digging deeper might lead them to the truth, and his female colleague points out the problem as they have no way to investigate and cannot even use police resources without a valid reason. Mio decides they should set the Satanaka case aside and focus on the headless corpse case for now, and she expresses her frustration that they have made no progress and wishes Rui could have a dream about it. He says he would love to. Trying to cheer him up, she tells him not to rush and then asks about his new ability. He reveals that is precognition. Mizuki looks uncomfortable as his colleagues react to the news, his expression unreadable. Mayo asks if there is something inconvenient about having precognition, noticing Mizuki's strange reaction. The man in the coat explains that his next words are just speculation based on what a messenger told him. He reveals that while agents have various abilities, memory manipulation, altering the past, and future prediction are sealed in hell. Rui asks if they are sealed as a form of insurance. Mizuki confirms this is correct, which makes the memory alteration even more reckless. Rui says that people get blinded by large profits and will do anything to make money, even illegal things. And Mizuki agrees, adding that there are always people who find ways to get around the rules. He then poses a hypothetical question to Rui. If another agent threatened his family to force him to alter a memory, would he do it? Mayo asks if they would eventually get caught. Mizuki reveals that the messenger only punishes those directly and deeply involved. She understands that by using an intermediary, the true mastermind can avoid getting caught. Rui then asks why the hidden nation collapsed. Mizuki explains that they hurt too many ordinary people, which drew the messenger's attention. Mayo is confused by the mention of a hidden nation. Mizuki tells her he will explain later and redirects them to find a connection between the cases. The young woman proudly announces that she has already found the connection, impressing her colleague. She explains that while the cases look like accidents individually, they seem intentional when linked together. Rui agrees it is too much for a coincidence. Mio reveals the victims are connected to both the Satonaka group and a specific accounting firm. Mizuki realizes money is involved and Rui asks about the accounting firm. She explains that given the victims' jobs, it would not be strange for them to frequent the firm, a detail she had previously overlooked. Rui suggests they should find the accountant, but Mio says she does not have the authority to do so. Mizuki nervously asks if they should ask the chief for permission to investigate the lead. She tells them she already tried, but he refused. Without more critical evidence, they cannot reopen the investigation. Rui suggests they investigate personally, but Mayo immediately dismisses the idea as impossible, and she explains they lack the time and manpower because the headless murder case has become a huge issue, and the chief is under pressure to solve it. He asks if they should just do nothing. She says no, but they must prioritize the headless case for now. Mayo gets a strange feeling about the case, sensing that there is a surprise waiting for them. At that moment, her phone rings, and she answers it with a simple hello, her expression curious. And so her expression turns serious as she tells the caller she will be there right away. After she hangs up, her colleagues ask what happened. Mayo informs them that another headless murder has occurred, this time in Nishiyanagi town. At the crime scene, a police officer stands guard behind yellow tape, securing the area where a body was found. When the trio arrives, an officer greets them, saying they have been expected. Mayo immediately asks him for an update on the situation. The officer reports that an elderly man found the body wrapped in garbage bags, and they are now trying to identify the victim. And she asks about nearby security cameras, but he tells her they were broken, which she finds suspiciously convenient. He explains that a recent robbery damaged the cameras, and they were waiting repairs. Mayo dismisses him to return to his post. She then turns to Rui, whose face has gone pale, and asks if he saw something. He says he will go check near the victim. Mio tells him he can rest if he is not feeling well. Noticing how pale he looks, he insists he is fine, and she bluntly tells him he looks like he is about to die and asks if they should go see the body. They approach a tent where Mizuki is examining the scene. He explains they must cover the victim's eyes to prevent further trauma to the family. Onlookers often post graphic images online without thinking about the consequences for the victim's loved ones. Roy asks why the body has not been moved. Mayo replies that they do not have enough personnel yet and tells him it is his turn to look. As he approaches the body, he sees the gruesome sight of a muscular, headless corpse covered in blood, and the horrifying scene makes him feel sick to his stomach, and he struggles to keep his composure. As he stares at the body, his eyes narrow and a strange sensation overcomes him, and suddenly, he is pulled into a vision, seeing a man running away from something in the darkness. The man in the vision stumbles on a rock, losing his balance as he tries to escape, and he falls hard, his arms flailing as he hits the ground with a thud. Terrified, the man begs for forgiveness from an unseen figure looming over him. A calm voice tells him not to be so scared, but the man's eyes are wide with terror. In a flash of red light, a sharp object slices through the air, severing the man's head from his body. A woman in high heels steps near the headless corpse, remarking that she ended it in one go, and so she then kicks the severed head, casually mentioning she will hand it over to the police officer. And so the woman's silhouette is seen against a red background as she playfully kicks the head, wondering how to deliver it. A close-up of the woman's face shows a sinister smile as she thinks about how cute the head is. Suddenly, her expression changes as she senses something, noting that a little mouse is peeking in on them. Back in reality, Rui is horrified, realizing that the killer in his vision noticed him. He breaks out in a cold sweat, his face contorted in fear as the terrifying vision ends. His colleagues approach him, and Mayo asks if he saw something scary. He can only manage a week, maybe, so the shock of the vision is too much for him, and he stumbles backward, losing his balance and falling to the ground. Onlookers are surprised to see a police officer collapse, wondering if his legs gave out. Some speculate he might be a rookie. The young agent lies on the ground, pale and unconscious, sweat beading on his forehead. Mizuki rushes to his side, telling Mio they need to wake him up immediately. Mio kneels beside Rui, shaking him and calling his name, trying to rouse him from his unconscious state. As he begins to stir, he instinctively grabs her hand, his eyes still closed. He opens his eyes, looking dazed and confused, and quickly apologizes as he lets go of her hand, and Mizuki helps him up, suggesting they move away from the growing crowd of onlookers to talk in a more private area. Mizuki tells Mio and Rui to go on ahead, saying he will handle things at the crime scene. Mio asks another officer if backup has arrived. He informs her that they will be there in about 2 minutes, and she instructs him to deal with the crowd when backup arrives, explaining that she has an urgent matter to attend to. A police car is seen driving down the road, likely heading toward the crime scene to provide support. While driving, Mio receives a call informing her that a civilian was taking photos. She is asked to coordinate with the media to prevent leaks. In a parking lot, the trio regroups, standing near their vehicles as they prepare to discuss what happened. Mio asks Rui how he is feeling. He reassures her that he is fine and thanks Mizuki for his help earlier. The man in the coat immediately asks Rui what he saw in his vision. He recounts seeing the victim being followed by a woman, and so he then reveals the most shocking part of his vision: the woman noticed him watching her. Mio is confused, asking how that is possible since his vision was of a past event. Rui admits he does not know either. Mio speculates there is a high chance the killer is an agent herself, and she finds it impossible that the killer could notice him looking into the past, as that should not be possible. Mizuki states that the past can never be changed. If what Rui saw is true, they need to involve the envoy of hell. The young agent asks if it is really that big of a problem. His colleague confirms it is, explaining the dangerous implications, and so Mio realizes that if the killer can see the past, she could potentially seize their present at will. Mizuki says that even if the killer can only see into the past, it is still a terrifying ability that allows her to create a convenient future. Mio questions whether the agents who forbid memory alteration would ever allow such a powerful ability to exist. Mizuki says he does not know, which is why they must meet with the envoy. Rui asks if there is a way to contact them. The man in the coat explains that the observer is the agent's overseer, but anyone can do it, and there is no real benefit. Mio asks what they should do next. The two men are silent for a moment as she hands them drinks from a vending machine. Mio turns to Rui, asking if he has any ideas about what they should do next, and so, he speculates that perhaps the killer can only notice them at the exact moment they are watching her. She asks why he thinks that. He admits he cannot explain it well but says it did not seem like she was aware of him from the start of the vision, so Mizuki agrees that his guess is probably right, adding that the killer's ability definitely has limits. Mio acknowledges that even with limits, it is a troublesome ability. She decides they should focus on contacting the envoy for now. She tells Rui he must be tired and should go home to rest. He agrees, looking exhausted. Mio offers to drive him home but he tells her he has already called for a car. As he walks away, she watches him with concern, thinking that he needs more training to handle the stress of his abilities. Mizuki watches his friend leave, a thoughtful expression on his face, but says nothing. Alone in an alley, Rui leans against a wall, frustrated and overwhelmed by the recent events. And suddenly, the same sinister presence from his vision appears behind him, the killer's voice echoing in his mind. And so he finds himself in a dark, unsettling space, with the killer's voice telling him not to be scared. The woman tells him not to run away since they have finally met. He tries to escape, but his legs feel heavy, and his eyes are wide with terror as he realizes he cannot escape her grasp. A shadowy figure of the woman appears before him, laughing softly at his fear. Her voice tells him that time is up. A hand touches his shoulder, and she warns him not to tell anyone they spoke. She then slaps him, the force of the blow sending him reeling as she tells him to follow her advice. Back in the alley, he collapses to the ground, clutching his head and wondering what just happened. He looks up at the sky, realizing he cannot tell anyone about his encounter with the mysterious woman. A shadowy figure looms over him, its hand reaching out as a voice asks what he is hiding. Rui is startled, his eyes wide with surprise as he looks up at the unexpected visitor. He recognizes the man as his teacher and asks what he is doing there. The teacher apologizes for startling him. The young man, still shaken, asks what brings him to this alley. He admits he thought it was one of his colleagues. The teacher explains he had a late meeting nearby and was taking a shortcut through the alley. Rui remarks on the coincidence. With a friendly smile, the man asks what Rui was doing sitting on the ground in a place like this. Rui makes up an excuse, saying the ground felt cool and nice. His teacher laughs and tells him not to catch a cold. The man offers him a ride, noting that it is difficult to find a taxi in this area. Rui hesitates, not wanting to be a bother. The teacher insists it is no trouble at all and tells him to come along with a warm smile. They walk together through a parking lot, heading toward the teacher's car. Rui seems surprised to find a parking lot in such an out-of-the-way place. Once they are in the car, the teacher apologizes again for startling him earlier. Rui tells him it is fine, and the car pulls out of the parking lot, and the teacher tells him not to worry about it. As they drive, they stop at a red light, the evening sky casting a warm glow around them. The teacher notices Rui seems distracted and asks if something is on his mind. The young man denies it. The man smiles kindly, sharing a piece of wisdom about how emotions can overwhelm a person if not dealt with. Rui asks if he knows psychology. The teacher says he has just learned things through life experience. The traffic light turns green, and they continue on their way as the conversation deepens. The teacher explains that while he knows it is rude to pry, he is concerned as his teacher. Rui finally admits that something is wrong but says he does not know how to explain it. He confesses that he is troubled and does not know what to do. His teacher looks at him with concern, asking for more details. Rui reminds his teacher of the murder he saw in a dream. He reveals he had that same dream again and is unsure if he should tell his friends. The man asks if it is a dream where someone gets hurt. Rui confirms it is, worried that telling them could put them in danger. The teacher suddenly swerves the car to the side of the road and stops, leaving Rui confused. He apologizes, explaining it is hard to talk while driving, and then asks if Rui has ever asked his friends how they feel about it. Rui admits he has not. The teacher advises him to ask, warning that misguided kindness can sometimes cause harm. He reassures his student, telling him he is a kind person and that his friends will support whatever he decides. Feeling encouraged, Rui thanks him and says he will decide after hearing his friends' opinions, and so he then invites his teacher to grab a meal, but the man says he has to get back to school for something important. As Rui expresses his disappointment, the teacher's phone rings. He promises to call when he has time, and so he answers the phone, telling the caller to proceed as instructed and that he will be there shortly. After hanging up, he apologizes to Rui, explaining there has been trouble with an experiment and he needs to rush over. Rui tells him it is fine and that he can take a taxi from there. His teacher reminds him to speak up if anything is bothering him again. The man smiles, saying it is his duty as a teacher to help his students solve their problems, and as the car drives away, Rui waves goodbye, thinking about how grateful he is to have such a good person in his life. Later that night, a full moon hangs in the sky, casting a soft glow over the city. The young agent is in bed, fast asleep, the events of the day finally catching up to him. He suddenly finds himself in a strange dark place, wondering if he is dreaming. A bright light flashes and the scene shifts, pulling him deeper into the dream world. In the dream, he sees a woman walking alone in a dimly lit space, her shadow stretching out behind her. The woman stumbles and falls, her face filled with alarm as she hits the ground. The scene is hazy, and Rui realizes he is observing the dream from a third-person perspective. Suddenly, a muscular man with a sinister grin appears, holding a large blade. The man stands over the fallen woman, blocking her escape as Rui watches helplessly from a distance. The attacker taunts the woman, telling her to run more as he looms over her with his weapon. Crying, the woman begs for her life, pleading with him to stop as she calls out for help. Rui rushes forward, positioning himself between the attacker and the woman, telling the man to stop. The attacker ignores him, swinging his blade with a vicious grin, intent on finishing his victim. In a brutal move, the man kicks the woman, sending her flying as she cries out in pain. The young agent's eyes widen in horror as he witnesses the brutal attack. Unable to believe what is happening, he shouts at the man to stop, his voice filled with desperation and anger. As the attacker turns his attention to him, Rui instinctively kicks out, trying to defend himself. The force of the confrontation throws him back, and he lands hard on the ground, shaken and disoriented. And a shadowy figure stands in the distance, complaining about having to clean up the mess again. Sunlight streams through a window, signaling the start of a new day as the dream world fades away. Rui wakes up with a gasp, sweat beading on his forehead, the nightmare still fresh in his mind, and his eyes snap open, the disturbing images from his dream flashing before him, and he sits up in bed, breathing heavily, and mutters to himself about having another dream like the last one. He then notices his phone ringing and sees 3 missed calls from Oyama Rin, and so he answers the phone, and a voice on the other end tells him there is a meeting and he needs to get there now. And so, his eyes narrow with suspicion as he wonders if this early morning meeting is related to his dream from the night before. In a meeting room, an officer reports that the victim is Ayako Mono, with the time of death between 3 and 4 a.m. The cameras were not working. Rui realizes that the date matches his dream, wondering if what he saw was the actual murder. The officer explains that security footage shows the victim was walking alone after meeting someone nearby. A photo of the victim is shown, a woman with long, light-colored hair and a serious expression. Rui instantly recognizes her as the woman from his dream. Mayo asks if he knows her. He remains silent, his eyes fixed on the photo, his mind racing as he processes the connection. The officer continues showing a photo of another victim, Kinjirao, from a previous case. He then displays a photo of Shimano Taro, another victim, explaining that the cases have caused a public uproar. Finally, he shows a photo of another victim, stating that the higher-ups have approved a joint investigation into all 4 cases. The last photo is of Ayako Mono, confirming she is the latest victim in the string of murders. The chief officer declares they will solve the case swiftly for the sake of the victims' families and the citizens. After the meeting, Mio asks Rui what he was thinking about. He suggests they head to the conference room. As they arrive, they meet Mizuki, who comments that the meeting ended sooner than he expected. Mayo remarks that it is about time the higher-ups started taking the cases seriously. Rui asks what she is talking about. Mizuki asks if he has not seen the news, but Rui explains he was called in right after waking up. Mizuki shows him a news report on a tablet, third headless case this month. Rui is shocked that the media found out first. Mayo explains that the paparazzi discovered the body at 4:27 a.m. while following a celebrity. Rui asks why the celebrity did not report it. Mio reveals they sold the story to a tabloid for a hefty price before calling the police. Mizuki notes that the story is all over social media, making a press blackout impossible. He adds it was a good way to get the higher-ups to act. Mayo changes the subject, asking Rui if he knew the victim. Mizuki theorizes that the killer can change a present from the past. Mayo asks if the future he sees is guaranteed to be real. He explains that an agent's ability is a bug, but the bug itself does not have bugs. Everything they see is monitored. Rue realizes they are being toyed with. Mayo wonders if the killer is also using a bug, as such an insane ability should not be possible, and she turns to her colleagues and asks if they can contact the envoy from hell. Mizuki tells her he tried but got no response. Rue then asks how they are supposed to contact them. The man in the coat reluctantly admits that they use incense to communicate with the envoy. Both Rui and Mayo are surprised and confused by this old-fashioned method. They both laugh, with Rui commenting that he thought they would use some kind of advanced technology. Mizuki apologizes for the outdated method, but his colleagues tell him they were just surprised, not making fun of him. Rue points out that he cannot hide his smirk. Mizuki explains the messenger has modern technology but only contacted him through incense. The young agent calls it a crazy story, and Mayo comments that is no wonder Hell's bug never gets fixed. Rue wonders if they do not fix the bug or if they simply cannot. Mayo agrees that it is possible they are unable to fix it. Mizuki asks if she has any proof. She argues they do not need proof, as there are only two types of people, those who will not do anything and those who cannot. Rue agrees, saying that if the cost of fixing the bug was too high, Hell would not leave it alone. Mayo wonders if Hell stepped in not just to atone for a past mistake but also to prevent things from getting worse. Mizuki asks if she is joking, explaining that if that were the case, they would either fix the bug or erase the agents. The young agent asks if they really cannot keep a single agent alive, considering the potential damage. Mizuki compares it to the trolley problem and advises her, as a police officer, not to answer that question. Mayo acknowledges that everyone has one life, but she wonders what she would do if she had to make that choice. And so she realizes that while the essence is different, the logic is the same as their work, and Hell cannot be unaware of it. Mayo explains that Hell arbitrarily picks observers and holds them responsible if agents cause trouble, similar to how the law acts as a deterrent for police. A shining sword hangs over a city, symbolizing the law that keeps everyone in check. Mizuki says Hell has something similar, but Rui argues that their punishments are only to protect their own authority. He explains that if agents break the rules, the messenger kills them, but otherwise, they can do whatever they want. Mayo compliments him on his analysis, adding that while they judge based on the law, Hell does not. Mizuki agrees but points out that ordinary people can become greedy, and supernatural powers would only amplify that greed. A shadowy figure with glowing red eyes stands before a crowd, representing the corrupting influence of power. Rue asks if they are overcomplicating things, trying to find a simpler explanation, and so Mayo hopes she is just overthinking it but wonders if it is pointless to appeal to the conscience of those not bound by law. Mizuki brings them back to the topic at hand, reminding them they were discussing the case. Mayo agrees, saying that if their guess is right, what Rui saw was an extraordinary event caused by Hell's bug. Mizuki adds that it is possible, as the root of everything is Hell's bug, and even a normal power would not clash with the principle that agents are unaffected by it. And she admits it sounds crazy hearing it from someone else, but Mizuki reminds her she was the one who guessed it. Rui says the more he thinks about it, the more tangled it gets, and their top priority is to contact the messenger. Mizuki enthusiastically agrees, calling the messenger their hope and savior. He then asks if they can finally get back to discussing the case, and Mayo agrees, and she tries to remember where they left off, looking a bit flustered, and Mizuki reminds her they were at the part where the autopsy was different from what Rui saw in his dream. He suggests they divide the work, and Mayo explains that if they do not have an answer, they each need to do what they can to find one. She assigns Mizuki the task of contacting the messenger, reporting the incident, and gathering information about the bug. Mayo tells Rui to sleep as much as possible and try to access the scenes in his dreams, as his ability is still unstable. She says she will handle the rest of the investigation and analyze the info they have gathered. The young man agrees, determined to solve the case quickly so he can finally get some peaceful sleep. The next day rain falls heavily, casting a gloomy atmosphere over the city. In his bed Rue coughs, feeling unwell after a restless night, and so lies awake, frustrated that he has been going back and forth between his bed and the dream scenes but has not found any new leads. He looks out the window at the rain, feeling cold and noticing his throat is scratchy. He thinks he might have a cold. At that moment, his phone starts ringing, the screen lighting up with an incoming call. He answers and it is Mio on the other end. She tells him she is in front of his house and to open the door. He gets dressed and goes to the door, surprised by her unexpected visit. He opens the door to find her soaked from the rain. She tells him she will get a towel for him. Once inside, she puts a towel on her head and asks what happened. He reveals that the case has been solved. Rui is shocked, asking if she means the headless incident, and she confirms it, explaining that the chief called and told them all the cases were done by the same person. She tells him the culprit is Sorabiko, the boyfriend of the latest victim. He wanted revenge on his cheating girlfriend. Rui questions how this could be the work of an ordinary person. He asks about the evidence and where it came from. Mayo says the evidence was found in Abiko's house, but then reveals the strange part: Ayako Momono never had a boyfriend. The young agent's eyes widen in disbelief as he tries to process this new, contradictory information.